Phone check. 1, 2. The microphone check. 1, 2, 1, 2. The microphone check. I got my headphones tuned between two different AM stations, and my briefcase is full of declassified information. Declassified. Declassified.
Good evening and welcome to News from Neptune for the second week of 2015. For more than 20 years, this program has been a spontaneous and unrehearsed discussion on the news of the week and its coverage by the media. First on a so-called community radio station, and when censored and locked out of there, welcome, I'm happy to say, by the good folks at Urbana Public Television. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussants tonight are Karen Aram and Ron Szoke. Our program's name, News from Neptune, was chosen to honor Noam Chomsky, who has been talking sense about American politics for twice the quarter century we've been on the air. Chomsky has said that in the American media, either you repeat the same conventional doctrines everybody is saying, or else you say something true, and it will sound like it's from Neptune. Our format is to take turns suggesting stories from the week's news that have been ignored or misreported, occasionally even innocently. Previous programs are archived on YouTube and posted to the Facebook page for News from Neptune, where you'll also find comments from viewers and articles that we refer to here on the air. I can be reached at carl@newsfromneptune.com, and I'm happy to receive your comments. It's January 9th in the week of the Epiphany in the Western Christian Church. It's Christmas week in the Eastern Christian Church. Epiphany is a commemoration of the journey of the Magi, the wise men, to Bethlehem, a story told in the Gospel according to Matthew. It's also the occasion for what I think is one of T.S. Eliot's best poems, which I'll post to the webpage and spare you my recitation. We have just passed Twelfth Night, memorialized in a play by Edward de Vere, and next Monday is Plough Monday, the traditional start of the English agricultural year, the first Monday after Epiphany. The day traditionally saw the resumption of work after the Christmas holidays, which were extensive in pre-modern England. In some areas, particularly in northern England and East England, a plow was hauled from house to house and a procession collecting money for charity as the work year began, a tradition that we might think of again these days. The plow dragged around on Plough Monday was accompanied by musicians and an old woman or a boy dressed as an old woman called the Bessie, and a man in the role of the fool, the tradition of the fool. We're not trying to imitate that tonight here, but instead of three wise men, you've got three wise guys, so to speak, I guess, on News from Neptune. But we'll search first for wisdom from Ron Szoke.
Well, you're unlikely to get any, but I think I'm going to...
I didn't catch you as the fool, though, you understand.
The popularity of fake news from The Onion and other places online suggests that we should engage in some fake commentary and punditry, but we, of course, can't match Fox News in this respect.
Maybe that's what they're doing all along. They're supposed to be.
So it occurred to me that part of what we're doing here is making the world safe for hypocrisy, in the sense that if hypocrisy becomes completely open and shameless violation of norms and standards, then we've lost. And as La Rochefoucauld said, hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. And
perfect for the Obama administration.
Right. So there's a lot to be said in elaborating that, but anyway, making it sound less horrible. Obama proposes free community college education for a number of students, first 2 years of community colleges. Tuition free, at least. There will be other expenses that may still make it impossible for a whole lot of people to get the first 2 years of college. A bank rate survey reported in the Wall Street Journal says that 62% of Americans have no emergency savings that would tide them over a $1,000 emergency room medical bill. or even a $500 car repair, which is a common enough thing. We're reading in the media again this week. I'm skipping over very lightly a whole lot of things here. The persistent confusion of weather with climate. Some people say, global warming, what do you mean?
It's cold
look
outside.
at it out there, right? It's so cold.
Right.
Right. See, I have this thermometer which disproves global warming.
Right.
Right. Right.
Tell them to put it back where they got it.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you tell the difference between a oral and rectal thermometer?
Jeez.
Only the taste. But anyway. Anyway.
Starting on a high note for the new year.
Well, I could go still lower. Let's see.
Please don't. No, please
Sure you
don't.
could, Ron.
You
Reported
put
in the Washington Post, approaching crisis of Japan, underpopulation, the aging population,
Yes.
which is declining. And the article attributes this to sexual apathy in Japan, followed by economic decline. Oh, they think it's very serious.
Yeah.
Japan has the third or
Yeah.
fourth
A lot of talk
largest
about that.
economy in the
Yeah.
world,
Right.
and they're not reproducing at the required rate of 1.2 children per woman
Exactly.
to maintain the population, so who will be working and buying stuff and making the
Right.
Well, maybe,
economy go around.
maybe they weren't so ethnocentric, and I say that seriously. Maybe they weren't so ethnocentric in this desire to only reproduce pure Japanese.
Right.
There wouldn't be a problem. Because there are, no, seriously, you have the Philippines where they have, I don't know the numbers, so many Filipinos are working all over Asia. They're doing a lot of the jobs, not just lower jobs, they're maids in Hong Kong, they're in China, but even professional jobs because they have the skills and they have the English language. So they're quite valuable in many ways. But it's going to take some intermarriage, but it's also going to take a lot of people looking at why they have to maintain the purity of race.
Yeah,
And this applies not just to the Japanese, but to others as well.
sure. Well, some see it not only as a threat to the Japanese economy, but to the world economy as well.
Right.
because-
China, I think, is experiencing this
Yeah.
too a little bit.
Yeah, and they point to the usual culprits, the conflict of a lot of women who are unable to have a family and have a career, also because Japan apparently is especially bad at not having daycare facilities and things like
Well,
that.
that's legitimate concern.
Yeah. So,
It's really kind of funny when we also get solicitations from groups saying that the real problem, of course, that the environmentalists, however, having us worrying about comes from the fact there are too many people around. I mean, we've really got to find a way to cut down population, particularly in the third world. I mean, I've got at least a couple of solicitations on that point this past week. So, you know, tell them,
Well,
go,
it varies a
tell them to
great
go to
deal.
Japan. You
Yeah.
know, racism will solve the problem for you.
no, it varies a great deal from place to place, and it's true that the population pressure in certain places around the big cities, for example, and in the southern hemisphere, is going to become horrendous.
Yeah.
The big urban centers have millions of residents in the shacks and favelas around the major cities, and that's getting worse and worse, apparently.
But the population problem there is not a result of people having too many children. I mean,
poverty.
people are not poor because they have too many children in the third world. People have too many children in the third world because they're
They're
poor.
poor,
And
exactly,
exactly.
exactly.
The only form of Social Security that exists in those favelas you're talking about, Ron, is having a family that'll take care of you.
Exactly.
Having kids who will go out and make sure that grandma doesn't starve.
Yeah.
And you know, this is the problem that it's across the world the case that development brings population down.
Absolutely.
I mean, as soon as a developed economy appears, population declines. The worry, on the other hand, that it's gone too far in Japan is almost amusing in this context, I think.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
there are some places that are giving material incentives to people who have more children. And,
Singapore, I think, was one nation that was very concerned that women were educated and were not marrying. But also, here's the other problem, is that both Singapore and China, they're actually looking at their educated population of women. They're concerned for the poor, which is why you have problems in China. In Guangdong, they're probably still forcing abortions. I don't know lately, but I know over the years I've heard that they still forced abortions because that's where the women are living in poverty, and that's a center of manufacturing. Where in Shanghai, as of 2009, they were promoting having more children to women living in Shanghai because those are the women who were deemed to be educated and have good jobs.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Supreme Court Justice, said, years ago that Roe v. Wade was decided the way it was because we didn't want to have too many of the sort of people we don't want too many of, and that was. She admitted what everyone realized at the time, that these issues were issues finally of population, of demographics and population manipulation, and the U.S. was promoting, particularly in countries we were concerned about, where in Latin America notably, where an insurgent population ran counter to American economic interests. We had big anti-natal campaigns. This has been a dimension of the population issue all along.
Yeah, the largest single factor in population increase or decrease seems to be the degree of education and prosperity of women.
Exactly.
And
Well,
we need to do something about
Right,
that.
and I pointed out before that.
It's going too far in Japan, is the notion.
Yeah. Well,
According-
this article portrays it as a kind of general distaste for sex or
Right,
something.
right.
Telling them to
Right.
get into the bedroom and get busy or something.
Clearly haven't seen any Japanese porn, have they?
I have mentioned before, though, that there's a book on this very topic, and he does point out that the one nation that of recent years that has been really successful is Iran, and that is because they raised the status of women and gave them opportunities, and these women were then able to make the choice of controlling their family size, or in a lot of cases, just simply not marrying. But we never hear about Iran doing anything that might be progressive or in favor of women. So.
Yeah, well, you'll not get that in the American media. Anything that
Never,
might be
right.
favorable to Iran.
Yeah, that may be changing too. So.
Well, exactly.
John Kerry's diplomatic revolution takes place. Well, no, I mean,
I'm sorry, go on. Yeah.
I think that if there are any of us around really to contemplate the issue 5, 10 years from now, this year, 2014, 2015, may turn out to be the year in which America's relationship to Iran alters as the U.S. desperately tries to reestablish the sort of control over the Middle East that really it's had and wanted for 2 generations. And bringing Iran home, i.e. making it a client once again, is clearly what the Obama-Kerry administration is trying to do, and in spite of furious denunciations from the Israelis.
Right.
And the point is to try to balance this mess. I mean, people are amazed at what the U.S. does in the Middle East when they say you seem to be fighting on one side here and the other side there. I mean, or fighting on both sides of these various issues. It all makes sense only if you understand that the U.S. has no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. And the interests are the control of Middle East energy resources. And will back and fill, betray and realign in whatever way tends to do that. For most of the 2 generations, support for, well, at least since 1967, support for Israel has been a major aspect of that policy. But the policy begins with the idea of controlling energy, not with supporting Israel. Right. And the Israelis know that. They know that if Israel ever ceases to be an asset for the United States in its control of Middle East energy resources, they'd be sold down the river perfectly fast. We've done it before, 1956.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ron. It seems to me that theme, that is the American-Israeli relationship, is so fraught that it needs to be sorted out, and we need to see more clearly what American administrations are doing. It's what we have many American liberals who say, well, the Israeli government just has too much control in Washington.
Right,
and
right.
therefore
I know.
they force Washington to do things that are not in the American interest. Now we get interested to talk about what the American interest amounts to there. But the most sophisticated version of that is Mearsheimer and Walt's book on the Israel lobby 5 years ago, in which they said essentially that. And I think that's pretty clearly false.
Yeah.
And that needs to be said.
I'm surprised to hear there are documentaries, some of them quite interesting, that are run on local Channel 12, WIL, TV, excuse me, on Tuesday and Wednesday nights, typically. And there was one on the gun lobby recently, and I was surprised to hear from them that they think the gun lobby, especially the NRA, the National Rifle Association, is the most powerful lobby in Washington. And there's a good deal to be said for that. I would have said it was the Israel lobby, which can get apparently a unanimous congressional vote on just about anything they want at any time. But
anything they want that's not contrary to American policy. I mean, my candidate would be the defense industry. The defense industry, which is essentially one lobby to whether they call themselves Lockheed Martin or whatever, I mean Raytheon or whatever, they're the one. There's even bigger bucks there than there are in these others. Sure. In some sense, what the NRA does retail, the defense lobby does wholesale, and that's true in politics as well. So if you want to pick the most powerful lobby in Washington, I think they'd be my candidate.
Yeah. Well, a surprising thing I've heard about the power of the gun lobby is that
small gun lobby, right?
Yeah, they right have been able to get legislation passed that the various agencies of the U.S. government are unable to forbidden to do research, forbidden by law, on the incidents of gun violence and so on, and to report the results of that research. That has been outlawed.
How could it be outlawed?
Yeah, how is that possible? I don't know.
It makes no sense.
Yeah. But anyway, that's the claim. And it's just amazing. So many people seem to be unaware of the extent of lobbyist control of the government. Right. For example, the recent budget bill was largely written, according to many sources, by lobbyists for Citibank.
Right.
And
Goldman Sachs people are not unknown in D.C.
Right. And it has occurred to me from time to time that the USA is very fruitfully viewed as a subsidiary of Goldman Sachs.
Right, exactly.
But anyway, that might
What's
be
the book?
controversial.
I can't think of the name of the man. I think he's at Princeton. I probably have it in the notes here someplace. Who's just published a long, almost Piketty-like study. He and his political science colleagues, and for all we've made fun of political science, occasionally they manage, in fact, to do something interesting. They looked at a good number of cases, a lot of empirical data on issues, political issues, and who was effective in pushing them. That is, whose wishes were being paid attention to, and they tried to differentiate the groups involved by income, by class, status, so forth and so on. And they came away with some quite shocking statistics about how basically 70% of Americans have no effect on the conclusions reached by government, on the bills passed by Congress or the actions of the executive. And it's only really what was anciently called the political class, roughly college graduates, the upper quarter of the income distribution probably in this country. Only they have much effect on any of these issues. Yeah. And so talking to Americans about any problems, whether it's gun violence or police violence or foreign war or discrimination or anything like that, really doesn't make much difference because 70% of those Americans won't have any effect on the policy outcomes.
Yeah.
It's only at best that top 20 to 30% who do. And this is all backed up with the sort of empirical research that, what's his name? I want to say Gislis, something like that, and his friends did at Princeton. It's an important point.
Well, they essentially tried a couple of hypotheses. One was to try to fit the results to the hypothesis that it was popular will, majority demands that did this thing. The other hypothesis was plutocracy, and plutocracy won decisively.
One hands down, exactly.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So
Plutocracy, yes. Rule by Pluto, quite literally. That is the god
well,
of the god
the
of money.
wealthy, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's amazing, but I'm going to stop and let Karen talk.
Okay. Karen, what's on your mind these
Well,
days?
I get.
I know on our earlier program, on the earlier program that all of us are involved in this week, run by the AWARE group, you talked about what I'm sure very few Americans heard of anything about. That is the election in Sri Lanka. I don't know about the other matter.
He's having that effect on you.
Back to Japan, the population.
Yeah, well, Sri Lanka.
Wrong effect, I think.
In any case.
The election in Sri
The
Lanka,
election, he said carefully.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
Sri Lanka. I was having trouble with saying,
Yeah.
Shri, and then
Right.
sleep.
Well, and previously I talked about the election that took place in Indonesia. And in both cases, let's just say that what appears to be the common man or the underdog has replaced the dictator or the abuser of human rights. And so, you know, we all should be jubilant. Well, wrong, because the common man, as they say, in the case of Indonesia, as I pointed out, Widodo, it turns out, was actually supported by all the same military people that supported the military dictatorship, and the U.S. and financial organizations or financial investors were just waiting, you know, to hear the news, because the plan is to, well, first of all, he already went ahead. He's starting to build up the military, a lot of more financing from military, but he's going to bring in the World Bank, the IMF, and a lot of international financiers, which does not spell good development for these poorer nations, especially a nation like Indonesia, which has a huge impoverished population. Okay, now we come to what you're referring to as Sri Lanka, and I saw the exact same scenario taking place with the former health minister Sirisena running against Rajapaksa, the former president, who actually called this election 2 years in advance, because he knew that the U.S. was taking to the UN, what do you call the court of
the ICC?
Not the ICC, the council, the Human Rights Council, I think, of the UN.
Right.
Yeah,
that's right. That is different.
Yeah,
yes.
and taking on the issue of his human rights abuses, specifically during the Tamil Tiger wars, I will call them. So I have no data with me to refer to, so just from memory. But the problem is Sirisena, the former health minister, was also the defense minister under Rajapaksa, and he held other positions as well within the government. So he is equally culpable of human rights abuses. It's very important.
The Lord high everything else.
Right. But he
had a little list.
Right.
So, yeah.
And the Financial Times was actually reporting a lot of this, leaving out certain things, but it was clear the way the Financial Times worded it, and we know who the Financial Times represents, London and Washington, D.C., and financial investors. The way they worded it, it becomes quite clear that when Sirisena quit his position as health minister under Rajapaksa, Rajapaksa was taken quite by surprise, as where both London and D.C. Their embassies had been informed weeks in advance. They were all well aware this election was going to take place. So, and there were enough comments in the Financial Times that the U.S. would, what is the word they use? If their man didn't win, they did not use these words, but they made it clear that they would be following the events very closely if the outcome wasn't pleasing to them. And this brings shudders to me, because all we have to do is look at what happened in Latin America. All we have to do is look at what's happened around the world, in Asia, any place where the U.S. man does not get into power through elections.
But was there
We end
really
up with
a
problems.
issue in Sri Lanka, or is in fact, as you pointed out, both of them were part of the previous government in spite of the
Right.
as defense
Right.
minister and
Oh
and
well,
prime minister,
oh
so-
well, you're bringing up what was the reason the U.S. was supporting Sirisena as
Yeah,
opposed to Rajapaksa. Well, because Rajapaksa had indicated that he was going to form closer ties, both economic, financial, etc., with China.
There we are.
Now, they had been, and the U.S. had been quite unhappy about this,
Mm-hmm.
they had close ties with China. And that's why I want to make it very clear. It's not that China's the good guy wearing white hats and, you know, the U.S. is the bad guys wearing black hats.
But that's
because
a good way
China,
to discuss it.
well, I'm afraid this is the problem with too many people in America. We were raised on those westerns where you could spot the good guy and you could spot, and there was always, and it was always just either or. I'm of the opinion now that you can't trust any government. The point is
Beginning
that
wisdom. Yeah.
China was supporting Rajapaksa with financial aid. He was supporting with weapons. He was supporting them in all of these respects. And of course, the U.S. doesn't like that, because the U.S.
Right.
wants to be the only one supporting them. So any suggestion of firming up closer ties to China is offensive to the U.S. government.
Right.
Because we want to be in total control of Asia, given Obama's pivot to Asia, which wasn't necessarily his idea. I think it's just the timing, because I think this was the plan. I think you pointed out, Carl and Ron, the plan going back to World War II, and actually previous to that, right, was our control of primarily China, but our control of Asia. So what we have done is we've formed these close ties with Australia, South Korea, other nations, Vietnam, you know, all of these nations, Indonesia, that we want to be in control of, as opposed to China.
Exactly.
China's one main friend, ally, is of course North Korea, because North Korea is right on their border.
Uncomfortable friend.
Which is why when this whole discussion started taking place, and the media was just being constantly bombarding us with the Sony hacking by North Korea of this film, The Interview, all I kept thinking was, well, gee, we've got to vilify as much as we can North Korea, because, of course, they're friends with China. And they're right on China's border. That is why they are friends. But
I think it may have been the most brilliant publicity move for a movie by an American an American movie maker.
Oh, yeah.
In years. I mean, since
some of what I read was that the U.S. State Department, and I'm not saying CIA because the article didn't say CIA. It said U.S. State Department, and it actually named the individuals within the U.S. State Department that actually approached Sony and to have this film made.
Oh,
So
yeah.
yeah,
No, I've heard that
posted,
too. Yeah, I've heard
well,
the
I
word
think I
connected ring.
posted that on Facebook.
But whether
And
it went
if-
went so far as to have a brilliant Black Advance publicity campaign,
Right,
that's not
right.
entirely clear yet.
Well, Sony's making off like bandits probably with this, because you have all these people going out and saying, oh, North Korea is imposing on our freedom of speech, which, again, if we get into freedom of speech.
Speech turns out to be an interesting theme this week, doesn't it?
Actually, yeah. In fact, I think it's probably more important what's happening in France. That has been dominating the news, both here in the U.S., and I see the handwriting. I mean, when France 24, a station that is broadcast on MHZ, along with European and Asian stations, has bumped all of the other stations off, and they've just been running France 24, covering breaking news, this particular issue, not yesterday, but the day before, and now again today, because of the shootings, etc. The coverage, you were talking, Ron, I think you were talking about Pegida. Just previous to a couple days ago, here we had a lot of coverage of these, well, if we don't call them racist, we have to refer to them as ethnocentrist I think they're racist, though, this group of people claiming they're not racist, but they just don't want Germany to become, or the rest of Europe, to become Islamist dominated or controlled by Islamists.
Yeah.
And they're out
As if that's a
protesting.
threat.
Yes, as if that's a threat. So suddenly this comes right on the heels of all of that. And of course, so many of the commentators that I've seen on France 24, I don't see many commentators speaking against the now reaction to what they call terrorism and the anti-terrorism reactions that are taking place across the nations. One or two people have spoken out against that, but the majority of the people seem to be overly concerned with the threat of terrorism, including the U.S. government. We're so concerned about the threat of terrorism now in France that we're sending in, I'm not sure who and what all, but we're certainly sending advisors, okay?
Yeah. Terrorism,
Which always is frightening to me when they refer to advisors.
Terrorism, of course, in 21st century America is the equivalent of what communism was in 20th century America, and
Exactly.
is used in the same lying fashions. Communism did exist in the 20th century, if by communism we mean the policies of the USSR, and terrorism does exist in the 21st century if you mean violence employed by governments to produce political results. Nevertheless, the manipulation of both of these themes by the American government is astonishing. And the success of the manipulation of both of these themes by the American government is astonishing.
This is reflected in the tendency of other countries now, other governments, to constantly refer to terrorism as a justification, or fighting terrorism as the justification for whatever they do. It's become highly popular now.
Oh, yeah.
Of course.
We want to repress people. We say they're terrorists, or they might be terrorists, or they might be cooperating with some terrorists, on and on.
And then we become the terrorists. That's the whole point. We are the terrorists as a result of our repression of people who might be terrorists.
Now, this week, of course, the attack on the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo, where folks walked in and murdered a dozen people in the offices of this private eye-like magazine, or almost onion-like magazine, I suppose you might say, was, of course, a great crime, and has led to a explosion of police counter-terror in France that apparently has killed a number of people who were, we hope they're the ones who were killed, were the ones responsible for the outrage. But I did like what Diana Johnstone wrote from Paris. She's been writing well on these matters for a good long time. And she said, and I quote a couple of paragraphs here, "I never liked the provocative covers of Charlie Hebdo, where the cartoons insulting the prophet, or for that matter Jesus, tended to be displayed." And these cartoons are quite, well, we were slipping into R rating a little while ago. These are X-rated.
Very X-rated,
pretty explicitly sodomizing.
Right.
Which is so...
But Diane Johnstone continues on that. She says, "It's a matter of taste. I don't consider scatological obscene drawings to be effective arguments, whether against religion or authority in general. But freedom of the press is also freedom to be vulgar and stupid from time to time. Charlie Hebdo was not in reality a model of freedom of speech. It has ended up, like so much of the human rights left, defending U.S.-led wars against dictators," in quotes. In 2002, Philippe Val, who was editor-in-chief of the magazine at the time, denounced Noam Chomsky for anti-Americanism and excessive criticism of Israel and of mainstream media. I mean, so, the notion that this was a splendid example of free speech and the free press is simply false, but that doesn't give anyone the right to kill me.
Of course not.
Charlie Hebdo was an extreme example of what's wrong with the politically correct line of the current French left. The irony is that the murderous attack by the apparently Islamist killers has suddenly sanctified this fading expression of extended adolescent revolt, which was losing its popular appeal, into the eternal banner of a free press and liberty of expression. This all in capitals. Whatever the murderers intended, this is what they have achieved. Along with taking innocent lives, they've surely deepened the sense of brutal chaos in this world, aggravated distrust between ethnic groups in France and in Europe, and no doubt accomplished other evil results as well. In this age of suspicion, conspiracy theories are certain to proliferate. And there have been such theories, including the notion that the killings at Charlie Hebdo was sponsored by the Mossad, by the Israeli Secret Service, and other groups across the country. One of the best political reporters in the world, I think, on such matters, we talk about him a lot here, Pepe Escobar, writing on this matter, says that black advance or blowback, whichever it was, the effects are overwhelmingly deleterious for an attempt to lessen the American-sponsored wars against terrorism around the world. You can say the same thing about 9/11. The perpetrators of 9/11, of the great crimes of 9/11, were people who were concerned about the American invasion of their homelands. The perpetrators of 9/11 said they did it because of the American sanctions against Iraq, which by American admissions killed 500,000 children, the Israeli oppression of the Palestinians, and the investment by American military of the holy places in Saudi Arabia. Those were the three reasons that prompted the 9/11 attack. We didn't hear much about that in this country because the banner of fighting terrorism had already been raised. But the events are similar, even though the casualty list, the list of dead, is a lot shorter in France this week. The events are similar in that the reasons people might think these were black advances are not nugatory. I don't think they were black advances in either case, but these are things that that yield to evidence. The fact of the matter is that the results can only be terrible, and we're seeing that already.
Yeah. Violence begets violence. That's, yeah, one way or another.
Well, I've read that Rush Limbaugh's theory is that it has something to do with Benghazi.
Yeah. Well, and
Everything is connected, right, Carl?
But the theory
Well,
is not
everything is
wrong. It
connected,
does have
but
something to do with Benghazi, because what was really going along in
Yes.
Benghazi is the CIA was running arms into Syria to keep the war against terrorism going in Syria, even though we were a little concerned at that point of exactly who was going to end up with those weapons. So, in a sense, Rush, as usual, is right. He just tends a little to the overemphasis. You're
Well,
watching Aware on the Air.
Let's face it, Russia's...
Sorry, look what I just did.
I'm sorry.
No, I just
Oh,
ID'd the other program.
Wrong program.
You were watching, in fact, news from Neptune. This is not a black advance for Aware on the Air, in spite of our threat. This is a news from Neptune, and we are talking about terrorism this week at home and abroad. Sorry, Karen, go ahead.
No, that's all right. I was going to say, we know that Rush Limbaugh's probably, his slant is just about Hillary Clinton vilifying her or something. I don't know. To me, that's all unimportant and trivial. I think
nobody can be wrong all the time.
Right. But I think what is of concern is the fact that I'm sure these people with Pegida in Germany are like, oh, wow, this was great.
Yep.
This was a great day in France, because that just
Pegida
proves,
being the anti-Muslim movement in Germany right now. Yep.
It's just more food to further contribute to the Islamophobia which is sweeping the world today, given, it doesn't work against communists anymore, so.
Exactly.
Yeah, so.
And if you ask the question, cui bono, the question who profits from this, who profits in the sense of who benefits from this, there's no question the people who want to encourage American-backed war in the Middle East benefit from the massacre in Paris.
Exactly.
And so it's not a big step to say, well, then it must have been a CIA operation, or it must have been a Mossad operation, or something like that.
Yeah.
Same way it goes in 9/11. Who benefited from 9/11?
Right.
The Americans who wanted to continue with popular support their war in the Middle East.
Right.
Okay, so it's easy to conclude that therefore they must have been responsible for the action. In fact, I think, as I said before, I think in both cases yields to facts, and the facts are that that's not the case. But you know, you can see how people can get there as they begin to look at the political context in which it occurs.
I wonder whether this obsession with calling everything we don't like terrorism will have the same longer-term effects on our culture and intellectual life that anti-communism did in the 50s
That's an interesting
and 60s. Because I'm amazed again and again, going back to the literature of that period, what was written about politics and other things, is the absolute obsession with repudiating communism, any taint of communism, any suggestion that I might be soft on communism and so on.
Right.
Reading the intellectual press of the period, which I was just starting to do at that time, the constant theme of all of it became pretty boring, as a matter of fact, is to accuse other intellectuals of being secretly soft on communism. That's the only thing they had to say.
Yeah, I have heard, I'm telling more than I know here, and regular viewers may think this is not unusual, but the fact of the matter is I've heard that, that the movie Selma, which I haven't seen, takes up the story of Martin Luther King and Lyndon Johnson, and this theme is present in there. In fact, either the movie itself or people associated with it make the point that, well, after all, it was worthwhile for the American government to be concerned about King's movement because he was supported by communists. You know, now that's literally true in the sense that the American Communist Party, which had always been in favor of civil rights, did indeed support the Montgomery bus boycott and King's movement. But this is used, as you say, Ron, as an excuse to say, okay, therefore it can't be there can't be any seriousness in it. This is something subversive, and it has to be put down. They say they're interested in civil rights, but they're actually communist sympathizers in supply. That sounds like a joke. But as the movie points out, it's not a joke, and it was not a joke at the time, which I remember well. We're all old enough to remember well, except for Karen, who's younger.
Well, we all know that based upon released government documents, that Nixon and Kissinger knew that they had to go in and take out Allende of Chile, president of Chile, because he might be implementing, not might be, but the plan was to implement socialist policies. And although there are a lot of American socialist groups that say, well, no, he was a pseudo-socialist, he was supported by the elites, whatever. The point is there was a lot of movement on the part of the unions at the time. And Allende was looking at a much more socialist society at the end of the day for his people. So the whole uprising, the killing of thousands of people, was simply a matter of we could not allow a socialist society to exist anywhere in Latin America because it might set a poor example.
Yeah,
and of course that impacts on profits, corporate profits, right?
I would make only one addition to that. I mean, what you say is absolutely true. But from the point of view of the American government, it was less that the government, that President Allende's government called itself socialist, than it threatened to remove, to throw off American control of the Chilean economy.
Right, yes,
That's
actually
really
you're right.
Now, the U.S. is equally unhappy with governments of the right that called themselves, or that were seen as essentially fascist, like Perón in Argentina, unless they played ball with Washington.
Right.
Now, most fascist governments understood which side their bread was buttered on, and did that. Their fear was that Allende would not in Chile, and therefore he had to be taken out, as Kissinger and others said in so many words.
Right.
And they did.
And even people who did our bidding, like Noriega, once they did something that we were not pleased with, whatever it, however minimal, he would be taken out.
That's an important example, and of course the great example in recent history is Saddam Hussein, the great and good friend of the United States government, until he misinterpreted his orders.
Right.
Yeah. So
and it goes back. I mean, it goes back to Iran in '54. I mean,
absolutely.
So this is nothing new. This is nothing under just the Obama administration. This is what I keep saying
Constant
is
American
that
policy.
it's been constant American policy. Now, here you reported something, I don't mean to get off the topic, but Ron, this earlier you said that Obama's talking about implementing a free community colleges for all Americans. When I saw that on a CNN news blip coming to me, I was euphoric. But then I thought, oh God, there's got to be a catch somewhere. Just as they say that Obama's going to veto the Keystone Pipeline. And it's like, that sounds really good. Let's hope he puts an end to it, because there are many people out there, environmentalists, who are saying, you know, he could have stopped this some time ago. He had the opportunity, so he can actually do away with the whole thing. It's within his power. So I hope these are not just negotiating tactics on his part, and I hope he actually follows through. We'll see. But yes, you're right.
You could throw Cuba policy into that mix too, the way in which this administration
well,
is. You know,
are we going to give Guantanamo? Are we going to close Guantanamo and give it back to Cuba, or are we going to bring in the World Bank and the IMF? I mean, Cuban leader is saying no, it's not going to happen. But let's wait and see. Let's wait and see what we do. Yeah. Yeah. And to whose benefit is this? Let's see what happens.
And what the policy actually is, as opposed to the spin that this notably spinning administration is giving to the matter. I think, once again, with a little perspective, we might see that the real difference between the Bush administration and the Obama administration is one of style or of presentation, so to speak.
Yeah.
They did exactly the same thing. And indeed, in many ways, the Obama administration did what the Bush administration did more vigorously and more viciously. But what was different is the Bush administration was sort of upfront about it. They sort of said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go kill people in Iraq, you know, because, gee, we don't want them to get out of hand. And the Obama administration covers sin with smooth names, as the scriptures say, and gets away with it. Everybody, for example, has been hearing the Obama administration talking recently about how we've ended the Afghanistan war and withdrawn from Afghanistan. And then quietly this week, the United States sends more Marines to Afghanistan. Now, it's the ability to lie with a straight face that differentiates Obama from Bush. Bush was either too dumb or too comfortable to lie that way, and they talked straightforwardly about the crimes they were committing.
So isn't that your usual conclusion, Carl, that the Republicans are actually morally superior to the Democrats because they're more explicit about their villainy?
Or it's stupider. Maybe that's it. I don't know. But I'm going to say that I think the difference will be seen as a difference of propagandistic style more than substance between these two administrations. And the jury is out, so to speak, about what the effects of the actual foreign policy that both administrations have been following will be, and it's very dangerous. We still have an ongoing and expanding war in the Middle East. Obama has already bombed more countries than Bush did. The score is 8-6, I think. You know, so I mean, the policy continues. The dogs bark, but the caravan moves on, you know. I mean, what we need is a clear understanding of what the policy is and a clear discussion of why that policy is the great political crime of the age, great political crimes of the age. You're watching News from Neptune, he said carefully, and let's see if we have any points we want to wind up with. Ron, you got some things you want to...
Well, I'm just wondering if there's any quick comments. Here is Senator Bernie Sanders' program, and a lot of noise is being made about trying to get him to run for president on the Democratic ticket, or Elizabeth Warren, either one. And neither one would be a total solution to our political problems, I'm sure.
I think
there's nobody ever will be. Anyone who's elected is going to wind up disappointing a whole lot of people. But I think this sounds like a good starting point for domestic policy, or at least debate. One, rebuilding our roads. Good thing to do, sounds to me. Of course, there are many problems.
Eisenhower did that, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, then it's time.
Yeah.
It's time to do
That's
it
a long
again.
time ago, right?
Yes.
Reversing climate change,
Sounds like a
That's
good
critical.
idea.
Yeah.
Absolutely
creating
critical.
jobs, sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Obama said he was going to do that, right?
Well, yeah, so did Mitt Romney.
Everybody
He never
says
said
that.
how. He was
Right.
going to wave his magic wand, I
Right,
guess,
right.
and produce 10 million jobs.
Give money to
but-
job creators.
Right, right. Protecting unions.
Which ones?
Right. Raising the
Police unions,
wage.
police unions.
That sounds good. Pay equity. Women workers today earn 78% of what their male counterparts make. That is kind of dubious in some respects. Some people pointed out this is comparing apples with oranges in a sense. But anyway, making trade work for workers, which would involve, I think, carefully evaluating the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Cutting college costs, sounds like a good thing to do. Breaking up big banks. Bringing health care to all. Ending poverty.
These all sound like
Yeah, and
great
stopping
things.
tax dodging corporations.
But
These
one
are
of the-
all very attractive slogans.
Yes, they are. But here's something that gives me cause for concern. On a domestic, yes, that sounds pretty good. But these are both people. First of all, the U.S. president is entirely responsible for our foreign policy. And yet both these people turned a blind eye to the killings in Gaza.
That's the thing I noticed. I keep getting surveys I'm supposed to respond to from various Democratic groups.
Right.
And they want to know what is your most important issue. But anything about foreign or military policy is never on the
Right,
list.
right. We're supposed to be kept in the
Well,
dark on that.
because that's not an issue.
Right,
Yeah.
and that's a problem, as far as I'm concerned, when you turn a blind eye to the slaughter of children and civilians and people. That bothers me. So I have a little problem with supporting them, which is why some of us here are trying to set up a local Green Party. Sorry, I have to put in a blip there.
Good.
Because even though I personally am not interested in local politics, I recognize how important local politics are, because that's the only way you start at the bottom locally and hopefully grow to a more to the federal level.
Tip O'Neill said all politics is local, and there's some
Exactly.
sense to that.
Yes, yes. As I said, it's not my interest, but I think it's critical, and so I'm hoping we'll get more people involved.
Yeah.
Because I just don't see any answers coming with the Democrats and the Republicans, given that they are supported by the corporations so
Well,
much.
yeah, that's why I have some sympathy with the silly party.
The silly party.
Monty Python.
As opposed to the stupid party.
Oh,
right?
okay.
No, the silly party and the sensible party.
That's right,
Okay,
right.
I thought you were talking about silly putty, and I was like,
Not quite.
oh well, at least you keep us amused. That's
Yeah.
keep us informed and amused.
And while this continues, of course, while this discussion goes on, and the discussion about both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren is a worthwhile discussion with the points that you two have just raised, I think, being salient. The war continues. The Obama administration continues to fight the war that it says it's not fighting in the Middle East. New reports on the drone war, which continues in the sense that Obama sends drones each week into various countries, including Pakistan, but not limited to Pakistan, in Southwest Asia and in North Africa, and East Africa. And the drone toll has now reached at least 5,000 by the most recent estimates. It's a secret program, of course, so we don't hear anything about it. The administration doesn't announce the targets that Obama has picked for attack with drones. We just find out about them when the countries attacked say that indeed they have been attacked again by drones. And it happens week in and week out.
Yeah.
It happens while the discussion of the Obama administration ending its war in Afghanistan and elsewhere goes on. A week ago Sunday, at least 9 Pakistanis were killed in a drone attack, which the Obama administration said nothing about, of course, and more indeed apparently this week. The matter has got so bad that apparently the Air Force, the U.S. Air Force, says that its drone fleet is being stressed by steadily increasing demand for strikes by the White House. That is, the number goes up, and it managed for the Air Force managed to get to its own propaganda people, get out this week saying, look, it's tough on us. We're having trouble keeping up with the demands for drone strikes that are coming from Obama. They talk to, as they do in Washington, friendly reporters to say, look, he's asking too much of us. It's not a matter of equipment. Apparently, we've managed to spend enough money that there are plenty of drones out there to kill people with around the world, that the Air Force said. What they lack are drone pilots. These are guys who sit in a facility in New Mexico, and pick out by television whom to kill. They're so strapped for manpower that they're raiding the training schools and canceling leave for overwork operators over the Christmas vacation. The Air Force is saying, look, the administration is demanding we kill people at such a rate that we're getting people who haven't even finished their training for how to kill people with a drone to come in and kill people with drones. Now, this is, in a real political discussion, we would be talking about what our government is doing in this regard. So far as I know, that discussion is not going on.
Well, part of it is the enormous burgeoning popularity of drones in general. From $20 toys you can buy anywhere to ever larger and more sophisticated weapons delivery systems.
But the reason they're popular with the Obama administration is they don't put people in Guantanamo. They don't. The CIA says clearly, we've got to kill these guys, not capture them and take them to Guantanamo, where they become a political problem. So kill them first.
Right.
You've been watching News from Neptune for the second week of the new year, 2015, a Plow Monday edition. And indeed, it sounds like we're back to the plow in the Obama administration. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussants tonight have been Karen Aram and Ron Szoke. Our thanks to our director and producer, Jason Liggett, thanks to whom also this and upcoming programs will be available on YouTube. Upcoming programs here on UPTV include Labor's Worldview, Sunday at 4, discussion with Neptuner David Johnson. More news from outside the bubble, as Harry Shearer says, that you can't hear elsewhere on CU, is heard here on UPTV. Also, WRFU Radio, listen to Living Simply with Ron, first Fridays at 8 a.m. You had a program this morning?
Oh, no, this is not the first Friday. We skipped the one on January 2nd.
Got it.
But we'll be back.
There we are.
Back in your ear, first Friday in February.
And a new column in Smile Politely, produced by your friends here at News from Neptune. Inshallah, we'll be back next week with a new edition of News from Neptune to remind you, in the words of Edward de Vere, what's past is prologue, what to come, and yours and my discharge. In the meantime, confusion to our enemies, and a good night to you.